And we're live. Bob Cooney here, coming to you from funky and weird Austin, Texas, where holed up for the weekend. And I'm here and really, really pleased. Did I time that poorly?
Oh, then I cut out for a second, so I didn't hear it.
Say hi, Joe.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
So we're going to talk today about games and game design and the theory behind games and what's happening. And Joe's a long-time game designer. He's worked in everything from analog games to digital games to more recently VR. And so give us a little bit about your background, Joe, just to kind of set the context for the conversation.
Sure. So I've been working in the game industry for 15 years. I actually started out, I've always been interested in creating entertaining products for everyone. And so I actually started off my career as a pro wrestler. I went to wrestling school and I wanted to learn how to make an audience cheer and pop and do all that stuff. And so after I did wrestling school, I was
hold on. Time out. We're going to stop right there. So what the fuck? You were going to be a pro wrestler?
Yeah. I went to school for it. And if anyone watches WWE now, one of my classmates was The Miz, who was WWE World Champion a few years ago. So I wrestled him a few times. And but I really wanted to understand what made something entertaining and what made something fun. And so I was about 20 or 21 when I went. And so I learned a lot. You learn the hard way how to entertain a crowd. Yeah, pro wrestling.
So did you have that in your family? Because I know a lot of times is that a family lineage for you, or was it just a fan, or what made you want to do that?
I was just a huge fan. Since I was a kid, through the 80s, I watched pro wrestling, and I just obsessed over it. And I figured, you know what, the funny thing was, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a game designer, and I thought I wasn't smart enough. And so I was like, well, I could do pro wrestling probably. That seems easier. And then I found out that it's not easy at all. It's very hard. And after I got done with wrestling school, I was like, okay, I could be a game designer, because that was the hardest thing to do.
Yeah. So that's amazing. Yeah. That's a great story.
Yeah.
And so who's your favorite wrestler growing up?
Growing up, it would have to be the Honky Tonk Man.
Oh, the Honky Tonk Man.
Yeah.
Awesome.
He's definitely my favorite. Yeah. It's said that, like, depending on whoever your favorite wrestler is, that's how you know why you're in the business. And the Honky Tonk Man is definitely more of an entertainment type character. He's not really like a technical wrestler or anything. He's more about entertaining the crowd. And so that's why he was my favorite, is that he knew how to get the crowd off their feet.
That's awesome. Great story. All right. So you had a short-lived wrestling career, and then boom, you decided, if I can do that, I can do anything.
Yeah, pretty much. And so I started working at Activision in 2004, I think, as a tester. And a year later, I went to Electronic Arts as a tester, and I started going to school at the Art Institute for game design and development. And I did that I went to school simultaneously while working in the game industry. In 2007, I think it was, I started working at Riot, when there was just like, I think 15 guys on the team at the time. And I helped with the design, and I was the associate producer. I helped the producer with directing animations for the characters. For the first 40 characters, they're actually me. Like, I set a camera up and I recorded myself doing the motions, and most of the animations are still in the game now for the characters.
And what game was that?
League of Legends. And I actually came up with that name, League of Legends, also.
Really?
Yeah. Because I wanted it to be LOL, because WoW had WOW. So I did League of Legends, and then I'm surprised that they kept the name a few years later. And then I did game design at Abandoned Interactive, which did these collectible toys into the video game world, like Spyro and Disney Infinity. This was before those were things.
Yeah.
I was there in 2010. Then I worked at Avatar Labs, where I was designing Facebook games when that was a thing. And I learned all about the core loops of how to make those engaging and fun. I was there for a couple of years, and then I went to Tiny Castle for a couple of years. We were doing some private games for this non-public thing. And then I was a game director at Reflection Health, which is their mission was to make physical therapy fun. And I had already been doing all kinds of weird stuff on all these weird platforms. So a task like making physical therapy fun didn't seem that daunting to me. And so it was a lot of fun working there. I worked with a Connect, and then afterwards I went back to Tiny Castle and we did games for like Nickelodeon and stuff like that. And then we transitioned into doing virtual reality games, and that's where I started doing that. Oh, and then in 2013 I did a project for Walt Disney Imagineering where we did a LARPing game, a LARPing experience. And from what I heard, that's what turned into what's now Star Wars Galaxies, the interactive game you can play with everyone.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know what LARPing is, it's live action role playing. And so think about like a bunch of people dressed up in medieval costumes or whatever, kind of like cosplay meets hitting each other with sticks and shit.
Yeah. And so that was a lot of fun. Let's see. And then, so for the last 4 years, I've been doing location-based virtual reality. And my whole studies for the last decade has been about what makes a product fun from the core, not necessarily strictly a video game or strictly digital or whatever, but what makes something fun in general. And so that's kind of been my life goal, is figuring that out. And I've interviewed a bunch of people, movie producers and actors and all kinds of things. I had a podcast I was doing a few years ago. And I was making a short documentary about it. So I'm currently writing a book about that. Well, what makes something fun?
Awesome.
And so that is what kind of, when VR started taking off, that was the perfect place for me to go, because I love emerging technology, and I'm very good at not relying on past methods of doing stuff, but understanding something from a very core element on how to make it entertaining and fun. And so I've done VR for the last 4 years, and I've been able to put a VR experience out in the public and see people react to it, and then change it, and next week see them react to that. So I've had a lot of hands-on experience. And so that's where we are now.
That's one of the great things about location-based entertainment too, is you can build something and see its manifestation in the world, and then go back and rev it and improve upon it in a way that's probably a little bit harder with consumer games, right? I mean, really, because you put it out there online and you do an active beta, but you're really not in somebody's home watching them play, right? I mean, you're trying to do it through analytics and screen captures and stuff. But so let's talk about. I want to go back to League of Legends, right? And because that's another thing that really fascinated me. And so so League of Legends, when you guys were coming up with that game, were you envisioning that as an esport? Like, what was the mindset of the business at that point in time?
I think because when I showed up, they've already had the idea of doing Dota, a version of Dota, and from the beginning, from what I remember, that they knew they were going to do microtrans and they were going to do an esport from the beginning, which was super cool because that wasn't a thing at the time. And so it was very much a really cool gamble that they did, and they knew from the beginning what they were doing. Brandon Beck and Mark Merrill, and so so when it released and it did what it did, it's kind of like, yeah, that's what they wanted it to do.
That wasn't an accident. That was very intentional.
Yeah, it was very intentional. So they're very smart guys.
Yeah, interesting. And so look, there's a lot of talk about, and I'm just going to stay on the esports thread a little bit, and then we'll move back to more, game design and fun and stuff like that. But a lot of people ask me about esports, and they see this kind of looming intersection between VR and esports, and wondering, is it going to be a thing? Like, what's your thinking along the lines of esports and VR, and at some point, do they intersect? And if so, how and why do you think?
I mean, it's really tough to tell the future, but my guesstimate is that I think it needs to be. I feel like the reason why people like modern esports is because they can see themselves playing that game and they do it. Like most people who are the biggest fans of football played football in high school. And so it resonates with them more. Like I love watching pro wrestling because I did it, And so I think once VR is around, so everyone got to try it and play with it and is very familiar with it, then VR esports would be a thing. But right now, I don't think people can relate to it if they saw VR as an esports.
Yeah. I think you make a great point. And wrestling is a great one. Like the reason you got into wrestling is because there was professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. And you could look up to those guys and say, fuck, I can do that, right? Mm-hmm. And then you go ahead and do it, and then you come back the other side of that and you watch it. And I think it's the same for most sports that have a professional level. Like you look at that and you're like watching basketball. I use basketball all the time as an analogy. Like you watch guys like LeBron and you're just like superhuman. Like none of us would ever aspire to that level, but we can kind of pretend in our minds when we go in the driveway or we go to the schoolyard or we go to the gym. And I think that people see esports. I think the people that are pushing for VR esports. Hold on a second. Rob, is it anybody else getting audio? Rob's saying he's not getting any audio. Okay. You might want to refresh the browser, Rob, if you can refresh. And so I think what's happening with this VR esports is that old people who don't see gamers as being athletes in their head because they're playing video games project the physicality of VR into the definition of an athlete. And I'll admit I'm an old guy and I played a little bit into that mindset until I met a couple of gamers and they told me about their training regimens, physical training regimens, and the fact that they had personal trainers and dietitians and sports psychology coaches on their teams that helped. Yeah. And I'm like, fuck, really? To play video games? And they're like, yeah, it's really intense. And I had no idea. And then you think about a Formula One racer, right? All he does is drive a car all day. How hard can that be? Right. But nobody's going to question that they're athletes. And so I think that's a mindset thing. And so people want VR to be an esport so they can feel good about the fact that they're athletes. But the reality is the people that are at the top of that game are frighteningly athletic in their own way.
Yeah, I agree. And even a lot of traditional sports, a lot of it is mental. And that could go for anything. It doesn't have to be physical. So.
Yeah, totally. And you don't see, the stereotypical gamer, which I won't even describe, but that's not who's at the pinnacle of this sport. I mean, you look at these guys and they're super fit, they're super intense, and anyway, cool. So let's talk about fun. Mm-hmm. So you've worked in VR for a while, but you've got a lot of other aspects of game design in your background, and I think you've mentioned to me you're working on a board game now, right?
I designed a board game last year with Nolan Bushnell. And it's called Saint Noir, and that's actually an Alexa-powered board game. So talking about emerging technology, and it's basically Clue meets Alexa, and that should be coming out later this month. So I'm interested to see how that does. Yeah.
So an Alexa-powered board game, how does it work?
So when it's interesting because it's so new and there's so many new problems that you run into. But the first thing you realize is that Alexa gets in the way a lot of like normal gameplay. So you have to make it so that Alexa helps you with whatever you're doing. And so in this case, Alexa's telling the story of a murder that happened, and she has all the characters' knowledge in her database, and you go out and you have to ask people questions about the night of the murder. And when I started out for the idea of the game, I wanted the ability to catch someone in a lie. And so it's spread out from there. So you're trying to corroborate information between different witnesses. And once you catch a lie, you start going down that rabbit hole, and then you figure out who the murderer is. So it should be interesting. I am interested to see how Alexa board games do. And Nolan is the one who came up with the idea. He said, can you design a Clue meets Alexa? So I was like, sure.
Clue meets Alexa, awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm doing some next week. We've got I'll be interviewing Crystal Ho from Intermission, which is a new VR escape room product that's launching at the Room Escape show in San Antonio. And so right away I think about that, and I think that's a great escape room adventure, which is using more audio clues and speech recognition. So is it really using kind of speech recognition to drive the gameplay?
Yeah, it is. It is listening to what you're saying, but it's laid out in a way so that it's because you can't let players do whatever they want because it's going to go off the rails really fast.
Yeah.
So it feels like you have control of what you're doing and where you're going. It's the illusion of control, but it is looking for certain questions during the game.
Cool, awesome. And are you going to buy? Is it going to be for sale on Amazon? And like, so if somebody owns Alexa, they're going to get an email saying buy this board game.
Yeah, I think it's you can pre-order it right now. I think it's $39.99.
What's it called?
Saint Noir.
How do you spell it? I'm going to put it.
Saint St. Noir Noire.
All right, Saint Noir. All right, we're gonna get that and check it out. Ships in about a month, you said?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome, cool. And so, all right, so let's talk about VR games. Mm-hmm. You've played a lot of them, right? In fact, I know at least you've flown to one of my clients and done kind of a product review for them about some of the emerging stuff. And you did some work with Modal, I know, and you said Castle Step. So what do you give me an evaluation? Like, what are you seeing in the market right now for VR? In the game design standpoint, what's your evaluation of the state of the industry right now?
I think people are definitely starting to respect VR as its own platform, which is good. But I still see the big mistake of people treating it as just another video game console. And the thing about Jesse Schell has a talk about this, and Jesse Schell's a wonderful guy from Carnegie Mellon, and he's been doing VR since the 90s. But the thing is, like, video games are created to be engaging. That's what they're made for. They need to be engaging, and they need to capture attention, and then they need to provide a lot of attention. And VR is very immersive, and so it's already engaging by itself. So when you put
Okay, cool. So hopefully Joe will log back in a second. In the meantime, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, which I usually do at the end. I'll do it in the middle. And so a couple of things coming up this week. I'll be on the Escape Show, and I'll be broadcasting live. I'm moderating a panel on escape rooms and VR. And so make sure that if you're not already in the mentoring group, go ahead and join that. There's a link to it in the tab. And also, if you want to check out the company that's launching, it's called Intermission, and the website is Enter the Mission. I just put it in the chat. And so if you sign up on there, we'll make sure you get a link to all of the media that we're going to be creating. But we're going to be doing this webinar live from the show floor of the show, and talking about VR and escape rooms and that intersection. I think Nick Richter, who used to be with Hollowgate, is going to be one of the guests on the panelists. He's working with Exit VR, which are the makers of Huxley. And I did a webinar with Sven, who's one of the founders of Huxley, a few months ago. So next week, make sure you tune in. Escape rooms, VR. There's a lot happening there in that space, and the economics of it are. I was mentioning to Joe earlier this morning before we got on the call that this week a new company called Imverse is at SIGGRAPH, and what they did is they just launched a volumetric capture VR system. It's still early, but in essence, what happens is they're using depth sensing cameras. And they're using those depth sensing cameras to scan your body in 3D. So you guys all know I'm a big fan of Mixcast and mixed reality, which is really a 2D image of you on a 2D screen inside a virtual environment, right? And so what these guys are doing is they're using a series of depth sensing cameras to scan and stitch together a 3D hologram of your body or multiple player bodies, project them into the virtual environment. So it's like a tracking system that creates a 3D hologram. So you see your body and the body of your friends in the virtual environment in real time. And then they just announced a deal with the makers of MacGyver to do a multiplayer holographic capture escape room. And that's going to be out sometime next year. So there's a lot happening in the VR escape room space. So we're going to be talking about that next week. And Joe, can you hear us now, Joe? Are you back? I see you there. Dun, dun, dun. The miracles of modern technology. So while we're waiting for Joe, who's got questions? Go ahead and post them in the chat. I am not at Gamescom, Dominica. I am. That's a big consumer game show, and it's crazy. It's crazy busy, and I just don't have the patience for that many people in one place. A lot of people. I used to go to Comic-Con too. I used to love Comic-Con, and now it's just gotten so big. CES is about the most I can handle, and even that's gotten too big for me. So it's called the 3D that holographic capture system is a company called Imverse. It's IMVERSE. I'll put it in the chat. And if you Google MacGyver escape room, Variety magazine covered a story, covered it recently. And so I'm not sure what happened with Joe. Joe, if you want to, maybe you should give me a call. All right, so Dominica, are you at Gamescom? Is it going on right now? Because I know SIGGRAPH is going on in LA as well, and I know the guys from Backlight, Fred Lacombe from Backlight is there showing their new another escape. I think it's an escape game. They did the Eclipse, which was one of my favorite adventures from IAPA last year. So I thought that was really cool. I'm just killing time. So let's see, Olaf, what do you think? How much gameplay needs to be an educational experience for arcades to get schools into arcades? So good question, Olaf. I think that, look, I don't think it has to be gamified. I think what Joe was about to say is that video games are about capturing and maintaining your attention. And that's what these core loops are. We talk to them. We talk about compulsion loops, right? So if you go back and you remember the early days of, there was a game by Capcom called Monster Hunter, where you would collect weapons, and those weapons you put them together into new weapons, and then those would allow you to defeat stronger monsters. And so it had this compulsion or core loop that would force you to play to progress. And then things like Farmville and Farmville happened, right? Where, you had this really, really intense core loop that, you had to build your farm, and then you had to wait in order for the things to grow so you could harvest them into more resources to be able to grow in the game. And what you could do is you could buy your way forward in the game. And so those games are there because the games themselves aren't really very immersive. But VR, by its nature, is wildly immersive, and so I don't know how much gameplay or compulsion loop needs to be into VR experiences, and especially for education. I think the fact that you've got their attention. So I've done some work with Steve Grubbs, who runs a company called Victory XR. I'm a big fan of them, and they did the frog dissection app in VR, which is one of the top selling educational apps and won tons of awards. And when I talked to him about the market, what he said is the number one problem for educators is engaging the unengageable. How do you engage students that are tuned out? Because our teaching methods go back to the industrial age, right? And so, VR engages them, AR engages them. Then once they're engaged, they'll learn. And so I don't think it needs to be gamified. I think it just needs to be interesting and compelling. And I think the bar is really low in VR. I think you put on a VR headset, the phone's gone, the window's gone, like the pretty girl sitting next to me that I want to pass notes to is gone. All of those distractions are tuned out. And I think that that's the power of VR from an educational standpoint. Now, as far as getting them into the arcades, I don't think you should be calling it an arcade. So Bill Tustin from Center Tech, I think, is my kind of picture child of who's doing the best job of getting schools to come into his facility. And he calls it Center Tech. And it's a technology center. It's not an arcade, because no school group is going to bring their kids to an arcade, right? I mean, can you imagine the permission slip that gets sent back at home is I need $20 to take your kid to a video arcade? Like, parents can be like, what the fuck? And so I think, making sure that you're positioned your facility as something other than an arcade is actually critical. And then there's a ton of content out there that's not games. You just put them in Google Earth, let them paint. There's a million things that are available as far as opportunities for for entertainment in VR. So so Andre says, so far the EDU VR stuff is not cooperative, which is a big issue according to my opinion. Yeah, really interesting. I'd be curious, Andre, why you think that's an issue, or why you're hearing that that's an issue, because I think in school, generally, there's not a lot of cooperative learning, right? I think that, if anything, it's competitive. It's who's got the right answer. Oh, I do, right? And there's like, and even like my kids are, my oldest daughter's in school, but it hasn't been so long since they were in high school. And she used to get really frustrated with the fact that she'd be forced to do projects cooperatively, and she'd have to carry the other students because they wouldn't actually do the work. And so I know you're talking about in schools, but I think the fact that does it have to be cooperative in an arcade or in a VR center? And I'm starting to come around with this kind of virtual reality or virtual experience center, this notion of experiences instead of games. And from a branding standpoint, I like that term better. And how do you get those people into your facility? I don't know that the experiences have to be cooperative. I think if you position the experience properly, I don't know why that would be a challenge. So Mike Oakes says, we developed a fire extinguisher training app at the show. Kids are wanting to keep going over and over again. So a fire extinguisher training app, there's a great example of something that you could do in VR, right? And I actually know somebody in Sacramento that's taken their arcade and turned it into a training center for fire captains. And they've built this training system where fire captains come in and give orders in a virtual fire, right? And they're bringing people into the arcades to do that, and then they're also taking that out to fire stations. So you guys know, if you listen to me at all, you have to have multiple pillars of your business, and education and training are the two biggest ones. And I think I agree with you, Andre. I think having more edutainment experiences, but they're there. You just got to go look for them. A lot of them are out there on Cardboard and Oculus Go. So I wouldn't be too stuck on the content that's on Springboard. And I know Springboard, by the way, is really pushing into education. And so if you're interested in that, you should talk to those guys, because they're pulling education content. And I think that's the next big pillar for those guys. And they're running some beta tests around education content. So I would take a look at that. Have we heard from Joe by any chance?
I haven't seen
Email? I think he must have lost internet. And so, which is really a bummer. So, yeah, and the science says, by the way, Andre, Olaf, if you're not following my blog, I'm going to drop this in here too. So I've been writing about the different types of consumer contexts in different types of locations. And one of them is around, you can see it at the bottom, aquarium, zoos, and science centers. And read that, because there's a lot going on there. And I think the next one I'm going to write is about the context of the consumer. This one is about like, how do they repurpose some of their physical facilities? And then the next one is the context of the consumer in these types of locations. And so I think that there's a massive opportunity regarding those types of, science centers. And here we go. It looks like Joe's coming back. So let's hope he has his tech stuff figured out. But so Aaron says, is that Aaron Polka? I'm not sure. Spoke with themed entertainment designer IAPA, who did fire training, not in VR, but motion platforms. Yeah, that's a big one. Joe's back.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, that's all right. The community's been keeping me busy by asking questions. We've been talking about educational experiences and stuff. So
okay,
I'm glad you're back, because I was running out of things to say.
Sorry about that.
And so one last question, so how much would I charge for a team building experience using VR? I think audience, and I'll do a blog about team building. And if you're selling it to like a sales team, I actually talked about this in a webinar a couple of weeks ago, or it might have been on my Facebook group. We had a thread about how to do team building in VR arcades with multiplayer. And if you're not in the Facebook group, you should join. But there's definitely a Facebook. We used to do it. I'll tell you what I did at Zero Latency. We had this zombie game called Zombie Outbreak or Zombie Survival, and it was a 6-player game. And it was actually really simple. But you had different places to go, and we would let a team of 6 go in and play 15 minutes. We would come back, and in a whiteboard, we would say, okay, what did you do wrong? Because they knew nothing. We would give them no briefing. We would let them figure it out. and they would self-organize a little bit, and then they would come back in and they would say, okay, we're going to go back in for a second round. What do we want to do differently? And you'd see leadership emerge. They would self-organize. They would sign roles. They would understand those roles. We would create communication protocols. Then they would go back in the game and their score would triple, right? And it was just a really, really hands-on, powerful example that they would learn themselves of communication, leadership, self-organization, like how all roles and responsibilities, teamwork, all of that stuff would just appear out of a fucking 15-minute zombie game. And so, you know, what could you charge for that? I could charge $1,000 for that. I could. I don't know if you can, but I could. And so like that comes into positioning and making sure your language is right and you're understanding the value of what you're delivering and who you're selling to. And that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, we could talk about that offline. Joe, welcome back. What were we talking about?
I was just about to get into what's going on with VR games and design.
Yeah.
Current trends. So I was just saying that like people are starting to realize they're starting to respect VR as its own platform, because one of the early things that I've seen, and I'm still seeing it now, is that people just put a video game into VR and they think it's the same thing. And the thing is, video games are designed to be super engaging and create tension and to get your attention. And VR on its own is already engaging. It's very immersive. And so when you put two things that are very engaging next to each other, one of them is going to lose out. And what ends up happening is that the video game aspect of the experience becomes so engaging that you forget you're in VR and you might as well not be in VR. And so I think you're one of the first things you do when you design a game is you say, is this the right platform for the game? And VR has a lot of strengths already. It's very immersive. And so instead of making something that's also more engaging and immersive on top of the VR, you work with what VR has. And for example, I was the lead interaction designer for Jurassic World's VR expedition at Dave & Buster's. And one thing, my goal there, once I figured out what they were trying to develop, was that I didn't want the interactions to get in the way of the cinematic experience, because it could have very easily turned into just a game.
Yeah. And
there was a follow-up game on that same vehicle. It's called like Dragon Frost or something.
Yeah.
And that one was very much a game. And when you play it, it's very hard to understand what's going on, and you forget that you're in VR because you're so focused on trying to shoot all these targets.
And it's really interesting. When I watched people play some of the early zero latency games, the gameplay was so intense that people would want to go in and just like, wow, this is amazing, right? And so, you know, the thing that became apparent is the company was spending all of this money building this amazing environment that nobody ever got to see because they were getting shot by robots in their face like every 10 seconds. So, really interesting comment.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, I did a haunted, it's called Ghost Manor, so it's like a haunted VR walkthrough, wireless, and there's a bunch of scares in different rooms, and people really liked it. But the one thing I didn't see coming was that we have a graveyard outdoor scene, and when people got in there, they just sat there and they looked around. Yeah. And that was like a really cool moment for them, and it wasn't intended to be like a cool moment. It was supposed to be scary, but like, so I think a lot of developers, they overlook the part that VR is on its own very immersive, and they're not building towards, they're not leaning on that. And so, and it just because you have interactions doesn't mean it has to be like a video game. Like one idea I had was having like a headlamp on your head that you never see, and then when you look around, your lamp shines on everything. And if you have like a velociraptor or a zombie or whatever, when it shines on them, they turn around and they see you. And so that you're doubling down on the immersiveness, and it's an interaction, but it's not necessarily a video game. So I think respecting VR as its own platform is one thing that I think people are starting to do a little more, but that's something that I think should be done a lot more.
And so let's talk about replayability, because that's a big theme in location-based VR, because oftentimes these things are going into locations where, you know, like FECs, for example, average 3.5 visits a year by someone. And so going in and having an anchor attraction, because VR tends to be more expensive, that maybe you play it once, you walk through and you're done, and it's not different the second time. Like, how do you balance that experience versus gameplay that actually drives replayability in VR? How do you deal with that?
Well, there's a lot of cool things you can do because you can, use like game techniques, where the original idea for the haunted experience was that each room was modular. So when you walk through it again, it was a music room, and then the second time it's a graveyard, and the third time. So you could have it just keep changing every time you go through, unlimited times almost. And so you don't necessarily have to have replayability getting a high score. You could have it because the experience changes every time. And the cool thing about the Ghost Manor was that we got a lot of people coming through a second time because it scared them so much. And not a lot of people, but there was like a good 10-15% of people would finish that experience in like a minute and a half, which is like well below the 5-minute standard that's around. Yeah. And so I always like to say that, like, value doesn't equal time, value equals experience. Yeah,
absolutely. Like we've all done like skydiving simulators, for example, right? They charge, I don't know what they charge, $100, and you're actually in the simulator for 120 seconds, right?
Oh, wow.
That's it. Like, so you want to talk about dollar per minute of actual experience. It's really short. The price is really high, but it's freaking amazing, and people do it. And so, I think we're way too hung up on time in this industry, and that's something I'd love to shake people out of. So when you do something like the haunted house, and you talk about, like, shining a lamp around, I think one of the things that says to me is you need to build more depth. So I think what most developers' reaction to that would be is, I'll build 4 games, right? And then when they come back, I'll have 4. Every 3 months they have a different game. And I think what you're saying is build a game with enough depth to where they come back, they actually have a different experience every time. And I actually got to believe that that's cheaper than building 4 games, isn't it?
Yeah, if you design it that way from the beginning, you're just essentially swapping out assets. And and if you advertise it as it's a different experience every time, then it would be cheaper than trying to create a new art style with new lore and new branding and all this other stuff.
Yeah. I think that was the tack that Minority Media took with Chaos Jump. They built like one game that had 17 different worlds, but you only get 3 of them in any instance, and it's randomly generated, right? And so, and I still haven't seen them all. In fact, I was kind of calling bullshit on them, because every time I play, I seem to get the same 3. But they swear to me it's there, and I know other people would have seen them. But I think that's a great idea. Is like, so all I was talking about high scores and so what about? Are you still there? You froze. Yeah. What about scoring and leaderboards and things like that? How does that play into, games versus experience? I know The Void tried to do this with their Wreck-It Ralph. Is they tried to gamify that a little bit, and I don't feel. My personal opinion was they didn't do a very good job of it. What's your opinion of the gamification of these things and leaderboards and how that plays in?
I think basically what leaderboards are is just social proof, and social proof is a really good way to retain users and to get the message out. But I feel like what happens is a lot of people, they use the scoring mechanism, and then that's the primary reason for the game to exist. And I think that's where the mistake is it's fine to have social proof. It's really good, because then it's good, like viral marketing and stuff like that, and it's good to want to have your name up in the lights for everyone to see. But it shouldn't be the purpose of going in there, because then you're just playing a video game. Like, you don't need VR at that point.
$35 video game.
Yeah, exactly. And so doing something that works in VR, that works with the experience, that works with the immersiveness of it, that also gives social proof some way. I think that's the real design, where the design thought should be. That's where the design intention should be.
Yeah. And so what about, so there's a big narrative right now around too many shooting games in VR. And I don't necessarily buy into that narrative, because I think if you look at where the money is in both movies and games, it's around shooting, right? I mean, action adventure is the top genre in both areas. So what's your thinking around shooting games, and why are they popular, and should we be intentionally avoiding them in the game development world for VR?
I think if you don't have a strong vision and a strong idea for an experience, then like I don't think you should move away from things that work unless you have like a strong vision. The thing is like shooting works. Everyone gets it. It's about skill. It's about aiming. It's about timing. So it has like a lot of stuff bunched in, and then all the consumers understand what it is when they see it. The problem is you probably are cutting out a section of the market. Like my grandma and my parents aren't going to play that game. But I think if you have, I'm not a big fan of shooters because I played so many. You know, by the time I was 15, or you know, I don't want any more shooters. But they work. You know, it's easy to understand. People get it. People know what they're in for. But I prefer stuff that's a lot more unique, you know. And I think just being able to, the hardest part is getting the first step of making something fun is making it resonate. And when something is a shooter, it right away resonates with a certain crowd. And so the skill is being able to for somebody to see a poster or a video for a VR experience and then to know exactly what the gameplay is like. That's not a shooter, you know. And so I'm not a fan of shooters personally, but they resonate with a certain crowd.
Yeah. So what are you seeing out there that you think is really unique that we should see more of in the VR world?
Oh, there's this game called it's like I don't even know the name of that one.
It's like this other game.
Yeah, it's like this other game that I don't know. I don't remember. It's this one where these villagers shoot at you from far away, and then you have like these gloves, and then you can catch them and throw them or do something.
It's called Golden Mace.
Oh, is that? Yeah, it's called Mace. Yeah.
Yep, and it was it's actually created by a company in Russia. It's actually, I think it's the guys behind the platform of VR, location-based VR thing. And it's really funny that you would say that because I actually saw that game for the first time. Box Blaster had it at the Bowl Expo in their 4-player enclosure, and it was just a prototype. Mm-hmm. They took that game and they ported it to a 4-player, and I played it. And I'm like, this is the best thing I've done in VR yet. And I was like, This is a system seller. You need to develop this. And it's fucking awesome to hear you say that because that was my instinct too. It was amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree because you can't put that game in any other platform, and that's the best part about it. And it's creative and it's funny and it's simple, like anyone can understand it. And I think games like that are what should be made more for location-based VR.
Yeah. Did you play that when you went down to Miami, or did you play that because it's available on like the Oculus or the Vive store or something like that?
Yeah, I played it in Miami, and when I played it, I was like, "This is the game."
This is the game. Yeah, that's why they brought it to Bowl Expo, and then I saw it. I'm like, "Oh my God, where have you been hiding this?"
Yeah. So that's a really good example of super clean design, super relevant to VR.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So and let's dissect that game a little bit. Like, so what is it about that besides the fact that it plays really well into the platform, right? Mm-hmm. What else is it about that game that made it fun, do you think?
So the first thing is that it has a lot of it's really easy. It's really, I advise using physics a lot in games because everyone understands how physics works. So when you see those villagers shooting up towards you, like, you know that they're coming towards you. So right away, you already understand what to do and what's about to happen. And then once you start grabbing because what you're going to do is you're going to start like grabbing stuff because all you have in your hands, and you realize you could grab them and you could punch them and you could throw them. And then it opens up all this creativity of all these creative possibilities in your head. Because one thing that I think a lot of VR games are getting away from, which is good, is everything you touch, you should be able to do something with it. Because as soon as you grab something and you can't grab it or it doesn't work or whatever, then it breaks the immersion.
Totally.
And so in that game, everything you touch has a purpose and you could do something with it. And so it invites all this creativity with it, especially, you know, having a 4-player game with other people. And it's super simple to understand, and then you want to experiment more with what's going on, and then it's really leaning on the VR aspect because now you're in this world and you're seeing this stuff and you're looking up and you're looking left and right, and so So I think it's the part where it's simple to understand and people watching know what's going on, and it's very apparent. It's not this weird technical thing that's happening. I think the simplicity of it is what makes it.
I think because one of the challenges with VR is it's all new, like mechanics, right? How I move, how I stand, how I control things, and so when you throw all of that at somebody that's never done VR at the first time, it can become overwhelming. And this is where the FTUI, or the first time user experience, becomes critical. And that's another thing that I see in a lot of games where they just ignore it and they throw you into it, and you're like, what the fuck am I supposed to be doing? And in this case, there's no tutorial really. You learn it as you play, which all good games, that's the way they should be.
Yes.
And so, and so where else have you seen like really good first-time user experience, or really like what are some of the do's and don'ts around that? Because that's something that developers need to get their heads around.
It's it should be intuitive, because VR is really intuitive. In regular games, there's a disconnect between how I make the player jump versus the controller and then my thought process. So I press X and he jumps. In VR, if you want to grab something, you just go grab something. And so understanding what the player should do and then making it easy for the player to just go and do it is what you should be doing. Like for the Ghost Manor that we did, we stood you in a dark hallway, and then you had a lamp that floated in front of you, and then it started going down the hall and it opened a door for you. So right away, you know, okay, I'm gonna
follow the light,
and that's it, you know. And so it's just predicting, it's just understanding what the player needs to do and then making it super easy for them to do it. But if you explained it to them, that's where it gets weird. That's where it becomes more of a task list, and it's not fun. The fun part is that the onus is on you. You're the one doing it, and that's what makes it scarier, and that's what makes it funner, is that you're not being told to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So what about teleportation? Like, I think that's a great example of people, just like, all right, we can't figure out how to make people move around. We're going to let them teleport. What's your feeling on
that? My feeling on that is, did I disconnect again? I'm good.
No, you're still here. You're still here.
Okay.
I can still hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I think teleportation is, it's okay. It's not intuitive. But I think teleportation is a result of people doing traditional video games in VR. And in video games, you move around a lot, and in VR, you can't really move that much. And so I think that's kind of like a remedy to be able to move around a lot. So I don't like it because it's not a very intuitive way of doing something. But it's a way of doing it. I don't know. I prefer. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, keep going. Sorry.
When I think of location-based VR, I think of more of a dark ride at Disneyland. So anyone should be able to go on it and have fun without really understanding what's going on. And so the closer you can get to a dark ride experience is the more it's just better for the user. All around.
So have you done Tower Tag? Have you ever played that?
I've seen it. I haven't done it yet.
So I think one of the things that Tower Tag did to solve the teleportation is they have you shoot a rope to another platform, and then you pull the gun back, and that propels you forward. That feels really intuitive, right? That's and so cool. Now all of a sudden there's this active, I'm shooting and pulling, and I'm moving across the play field. And so they've took that extra step of teleportation to make it intuitive, and it's one of the best games out there because of that.
That's cool. I like that.
And so, but one of the questions then becomes like, so at some point, a thumbstick, or two thumbsticks became the way we move around in console games. And at first it probably wasn't very intuitive, but then people started copying it and more happened. Is that going to happen with teleportation in VR, where it's just going to be the way we move around? Because you're seeing it in a lot of games.
Right. I think it's going to be more. I mean, I don't like predicting the future, but it's like what happened to Street Fighter. So Street Fighter was really popular, Street Fighter 1, but 2 especially, because it was such a novel, cool thing. Then they started getting more geeky and techie with the characters, and now only like hardcore players can and should play it. And I think that's what might happen with VR, is that people are going to get used to teleporting and things like that, but then it's going to go more towards hardcore VR players, and then the LBVR or the more casual fans are not going to use it as much. So it's going to go probably in two directions.
Yeah. So as somebody who's seen the game industry kind of evolve over, a bunch of decades, what's your, and I know you don't want to predict the future, but fuck that, I'm going to ask you anyway. So what's your prediction for VR? Like, how does it play out, both consumer and location based?
In 2027, no. I think that the tech is always getting better. Like, even over the last 3 or 4 years since I started this, it's gotten way, way better. So I think it's going to be affordable enough for casual people to have it. I think that would be the goal. I think that it's weird because I feel like location-based VR it's kind of ruining some like actual amusement park experiences. Like I feel like the Falcon, the Star Wars ride, the
Millennium Falcon one, yeah.
I feel like that's not really good because they're trying to add interactions in it, and it just doesn't feel really good. And I'd rather just have a dark ride instead.
Yeah. So
I feel like people are kind of figuring out where VR works or where stuff like that works and where it doesn't. I think it's, for the short term, it's going to be LBVR is going to be it, and then once tech gets more affordable, it might go home and it's going to be more usable.
So interaction, you bring up a really good thing. Like, so now they've created a ride where the experience is going to be the Millennium Falcon ride, highly dependent on who you do it with.
Yeah.
But we're starting to see like interaction being put in places where we've never seen it before. And a great example of that for me was Netflix's Dark Mirror Bandersnatch episode, right? Where have you done that one yet? Have you watched it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, dude, as a game designer, you have to watch it. Because the story is really meta around the technology. I'll just stop there and won't say anymore. But we're starting to see, but you can watch that 3-4. It's like it turns a 1 hour show into a 3 hour experience, really, because you want to circle back and say, okay, what if I would have said this here? Or what if I would have chosen that path? So it's basically branched story lines, right? Which we've had in video games since Time Traveler, right? The Sega hologram game, or Dragon's Lair. But but this is really, really well done. So I'd love your opinion on it afterwards. But are there places besides rides where interaction just doesn't make sense in VR? Like, what about 360 video and like all of the whole video thing? What's your feeling around that?
I actually did it was a Jesus Christ, like his stories. It was a 360 video thing that Vive was doing, and I was surprisingly engaged by that because just because the environment, whenever because I kind of have ADD, so whenever I look around. Because that's what I usually do when I'm watching TV. I just start looking around for something else to do, and it's just reinforced the story because I look over here and then there's like pottery, and I look over here and it's like a cross or whatever, and I'm like, that's right, I'm in this world, and then I keep watching, and I watch it for like an hour, and I was like, this is surprisingly engaging. So I think 360 video can work if it's the right context,
And if you're ADD.
ADD.
Because we're all texting while we're watching television now, right? I mean, that's just, multiple. Like the whole second screen thing not too long ago was not a thing. And then I think it was a couple like Breaking Bad and Walking Dead came out with second screen experiences. And now like they've trained us to be on a mobile device while we're watching television. And I think that gets back to what you were talking about, VR being really immersive. Like, it doesn't have to be that engaging, because once you're in it, you're in it.
Yes, exactly.
So what you're saying is we need to back off some of the gamification of these experiences, which is really super counterintuitive. That's not what I would have expected.
Oh, no, I think, because at the end of the day, you're trying to make something fun. That's the point of the whole experience. And games are used to engage you, but VR is already engaging. So you don't need that much gameplay stuff. You can still have interactions and things like that and some gameplay elements, but as long as it doesn't take the main attention away from being in VR.
So more environments, more variety environments, more things to explore in the environments, and then back off some of the traditional gameplay elements. It sounds like that's the Joe Mara's subscription for success in VR.
Yeah, and as long as like, it just has to be fun, and fun is about discovery essentially when you narrow it down. And there's a lot of discovery to have in VR, especially if you're creative. A lot of creative people are doing VR stuff. Yeah. So it's all about just creating really good discovery moments, and games do that.
And there's a long history of games that are about discovery. And while you were offline, I think I talked about the Comcast, was it Comcast or Konami that did Monster Hunter?
Yeah.
That game was all about exploration, finding different components, putting them together in weapons to progress like through. And so there's a long history of games being exploratory.
Yeah.
And so what stops us from doing that in VR? What do you think that is?
I think that it's that most games, they have to purposely be hyper engaging in order to command your attention. They have to have time limits, like Tetris. You only have a few seconds before the thing hits the bottom, or you're sneaking around in Metal Gear Solid, or what. Every game has tension. And so when we think of interactive digital stuff, we automatically think of video games. And so when we do VR, we're just taking notes from video games, but video games are doing it to keep your attention. But in VR, you don't need to keep their attention that much. So I think truly understanding what makes a game fun, or what makes something fun, is the key to finding out what makes something fun in VR. Yeah. And at the end of it, it's always discovery of some kind. Yeah.
Interesting. And I'm not playing a lot of games these days in VR that have a lot of discovery, to be honest with you. It's all like, it's all right there in front of you. I think and so can the discovery be like, can it be complicated? How do you have simple discovery? Like, is it like where does that come in the fun quotient? Like, do I have to feel like there's some accomplishment by discovering it, or is the discovery enough, or does there have to be randomization in the discovery? Like, how do you make discovery fun so it could play out in a LBVR experience?
So specifically, it's discovery that's preceded by tension. So when you have a tense moment and then you cut that tension with discovery, that is specifically what makes something fun in all mediums. I think Christoph Waltz, the Academy Award-winning actor, he said that laughter is the cutting of tension. And he's completely right. Even in good jokes, comedians, they always say something that brings tension, and then they hit you with a discovery moment that you necessarily don't see coming, and then that's where the laugh comes in.
So when I think of discovery, I think of finding something, but that's not what you mean. Give me an example of discovery that might be counter to what people might intuitively think.
So like a super simple version would be Mario Brothers. If you have like a gap that's the width of Mario, you're just going to jump over it. But if you have one that's the exact maximum distance that he could jump, you're like, oh shoot, I don't know if I can make that. And then you run, and then you try to time it perfectly, and then whatever the result is a discovery moment. So whether you make it or die, it's a discovery moment. And so it's creating tension, and then cutting the tension with discovery is the core of what makes something fun.
Interesting. And that seems like a really simple concept. Is it hard to pull off? Because I don't see it in a lot of, I think Golden Mace is a great example of where you have that. Oh, what can I do? Oh, fuck, I can catch this thing. Wait, there's one flying at me with a target. I wonder if I can hit it. Boom, throw it. Boom, I hit it. Now I can use these as weapons. Oh, wait, there's a spear. I can catch the spear. I can stab them with it. I can hit them with it. Like that game was rife with discovery. I didn't put that together until just now.
Yeah, it's what I've been studying for the last 10 years. And when I've been interviewing all these people, they all said this same thing. They all say it's first you resonate, then you engage, then you have tension, and then you have discovery. So it's the same in all fields of entertainment. And that's kind of the formula. Once you understand it, it's easier to put that in whatever product you're making.
Wow. All right, I'm gonna leave on that point, because I actually feel like that's one of the best insights I've gotten out of any of the deep dives that I've done. I've done, I don't know, 20 something of these now, and we're into the second. Yeah, I think we're into the second half of the year. So, but that was fascinating. So I'm gonna cut it right there, unless you got some parting words of wisdom beyond that.
No, you could go to whatmakesitfun.com, and I have all my interviews are up there.
whatmakesitfun.com. Okay, all you guys go there, and you're working on a book. What else is coming for you? What's coming up in the near future?
I got that board game with Nolan Bushnell coming up. I'm working on a VR motion sim coaster for a client, and I have a card game I made it for Los Angeles. That's going to be in a bunch of bars in Los Angeles. I'm just doing that for fun.
So a card game for bars.
Yeah.
Awesome. We should talk about that online because are you familiar with BuzzTime?
No.
Somebody that does the network trivia games at Buffalo Wild Wings on the tablets.
Oh, okay.
I know a bunch of people. I used to work there. You should talk to them. It could be a really good distribution channel for you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I do like consulting and I do development for mobile games and VR and stuff like that, independently.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about building a VR game, or you've built one and you're not quite sure it's got enough discovery, you can get Joe at whatmakesitfun.com. I'm sure you've got a contact form or whatever. Yeah. You want to give people your email, or
for that you could go to josephmares.com. JOSEPHMARES.
There you go. Awesome. Joe, thanks. Always a pleasure catching up with you, man. And really appreciate the insights. Freaking brilliant. And and we'll see you somewhere down the road.
Thanks. It was fun, Bob.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next week live from the Room Escape Show in San Antonio, Texas. I'll be with Crystal Ho, who's the founder of Intermission. We'll be talking about all things VR and escape room. So have a great week, and we'll see you in San Antonio. Take care.
Thanks, guys.